conversing and connecting. Now, the dining table might not be that for you. Might be a very different image. But I would imagine that there's probably some context for you that is the image of coming together with others where there's something special that happens in relationship. Now, just because this image is what I have doesn't mean the Dove household always has the family sitting around and everything is going orderly and nice. With 4 young kids, 8 years of age and under, it's a little hard for everyone to sit still at a table for more than a minute or two. But there's these little snippets I have of what that looks like. Even last night, we as a family sat around and had pizza together as we celebrated an achievement at Arwen at her school. And it was just for a couple of minutes when we sat at the table. It was precious to me. We were together. We were connected. Table for me is this warm image where we come together and we share life. And there's connection. There's conversation. But something goes wrong often, doesn't it? In our relationships. And sometimes somebody's not at the table that you would really like to have at the table. Or perhaps somebody used to sit at the table that no longer sits at the table, and actually they're not welcome to sit at the table anymore. Something happened weeks ago, months ago, years ago. We still long for the deep connection where we would be together, chatting, conversing, just connecting, but something happened. And now they're no longer invited to come and sit. Or perhaps they don't respond to the invitation anymore because of whatever happened to come and sit right here. Something went wrong. Somebody let us down. There's some wall, albeit invisible, between the people here at the table. Isn't that often how life tends to work? A friendship has gone sour. A marriage has broken apart. It might be that there are deep misunderstandings. It might be that you're over here and you're wondering why you can't be invited to the table. You know that there was a shift in your friendship and your relationship some time ago, but you still don't know what happened. You've never been told, and you kind of wonder, is it something you did? Is it something you said? Is it just, what was it? But weeks, months, even years have gone by, and you're no longer invited, and you still feel this invisible barrier, this invisible wall. Or perhaps you know what it was, and it's you who sits at the table, but wanting to exclude somebody else. It's just never been reconciled, never been a coming together once again. Been hurt. There was that thing that happened, and now there's a rift. So we think of this deep, warm image, but at times it also reminds us that somebody is not sitting at the table, chatting, conversing, and connecting. Jesus stepped into a world kind of messed up like this one. And the world he stepped into knew that the dining table, or had a perspective that the dining table was a very special place as well. In Jesus' time, the ancient people understood the dining table to be this kind of miniature temple, as it were. It's a place of fellowship. It's where something special, something almost mysterious happened around a meal table where people relaxed, and there was this hospitality that happened in a very special way. And so I want to share a story with you today a story that Jesus told to explain why he was sitting at the table with particular groups of people. Groups of people that some others thought he should not be sitting with. And Jesus tells some stories to explain why he's at this table and why he's including some others that these people think shouldn't be included to sit at the table. The story takes place in Luke chapter 15. Right at the beginning of Luke chapter 15, we read this. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Jesus is sitting at the table, dining at the table with these notorious sinners. So there's a couple of groups of people here. First, we have the Pharisees and teachers of religious law. And if you've grown up in kind of church world, whenever you see, the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law, and you hear that phrase and you see that phrase, it's almost like this instant booing that goes on, right? You kind of sitting like, boo, because we just know these are the bad guys. We always see them painted badly. But in Jesus' day, these were the good guys. I mean, these are the guys you would want to have at your table. They had a fantastic reputation. That you wanted to be around these people. You wanted your children to grow up and be like them. They had a well respected by the community of the day. People wanted them to come to your table, dine with you, because it would also make you look good. And the Pharisees and religious leaders look at this other group at the table, and they're a bit surprised that Jesus would be hanging out with them. A group that's, in this verse, called the tax collectors, another notorious sinners, probably a phrase that the religious leaders had come up with. Other such sinful people. And in that group, there's probably a whole range of diverse people. There are, the tax collectors there. Tax collectors at that time were Jewish people who were contracted to work for the Gentile, for the Romans. And so they would go out and they'd have on this commission basis where they would get taxes, receive taxes for the Roman, people. And because the Romans weren't liked, anyone that would do that is already seen as a traitor. But the tax collectors were kind of like, we're just renowned to take something off the top of that. And they would negotiate what that rate was, and they weren't all that well known for their ethics. As a result, the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law didn't trust them. They wouldn't have them serve as witnesses in a court of law. It meant nothing to them. They weren't even allowed in the synagogue to worship because they needed to change and clean up their act before they could come. Now, typically in a group like this were prostitutes, women who were not just sexually immoral, but they were sexually immoral for their career. They were typically associated in this group of people too. In addition, there were tended to be people who were sick, poor, and lame. Men and women whose conditions, as the Pharisees and teachers of religious law understood, had these conditions, were in this situation because of their own sin or the sin of others directly affecting them. And yet, so they're kind of surprised that, these kind of white-collar thieves and this general riffraff and these immoral women, the kind of the moral downcast of society, Jesus would actually be inviting to sit at his table and to actually dine with Jesus. And remember, at that time, the dining table was seen as this kind of miniature temple. And so to even eat, even eat with them, this is huge. So understandably, the Pharisees are feeling a little confused, a little uncomfortable. I mean, didn't Jesus get the memo that you're not meant to do this? Didn't Jesus get the memo that you're just meant to associate with the people who have it all together? Why is Jesus doing this? I mean, doesn't he realize when he sits at the table with these sorts of people, he's kind of endorsing their behavior. He's kind of condoning what they're doing, isn't he? And so Jesus, who knows what they're thinking, knows the thoughts, knows what they're saying to each other, steps in. And he tells these 3 stories. And in each of the stories he tells, there's something that's lost, there's something that's found, and there's great rejoicing as a result. So the first story he tells is the story of a lost sheep. And the sheep's found, and there's this great rejoicing. And then he tells a story about a woman who's lost a coin, and she finds it, and there's, again, great rejoicing as a result. And then he tells a story, which we're going to camp on a little bit today, well-known story. called the prodigal son. But it's a little different to the other two stories. It has the same element. Something's lost, something's found, great rejoicing. But in this story, there's two sons, and Jesus likes to put a bit of a twist in the story. And again, the reason he tells the story is to explain why he's dining at the table with these groups of people that the Pharisees deem not worthy to be sitting at the table with anybody like Jesus. Now, my guess is that most of you know the story well, but it's going to go back to the story and try as it were to see it as though you've seen it for the first time. Jesus said, a man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. The teenage son has had enough of it all. He's sick of it all. He has the audacity to ask his father for his inheritance before his father dies, which even now would be like a slap across the face, complete insult. At that time, this is like saying, Dad, I want you dead. Can I just have my stuff now? The father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. You're paying cash for anything and everything he sets his eyes on. He's having a really good time, partying with anybody and everybody that he can. There's no rules, there's no curfews, there's no restrictions, just nothing. He can just do anything he wants. And he lived it up until about the time his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. Remember, this is a Jewish context. Jews don't associate with pigs, but he is desperate. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. There's a famine, there's nothing left, there's no benefit to draw from, there's no Salvation Army place to run to, there's no food banks around. He's desperate. He hangs out with the pigs, and even what the pigs are eating looks good to him. Finally came to his senses. He said to himself, at home, even the hired servants had food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. He comes to his senses, doesn't he? He realizes how screwed up he is. And he wants to go home, wants to apologize, just wants to be kind of a slave, a servant of his father's, but at least he will be, having some food and won't have to hang out with the pigs. And so he rehearses it all, gets his lines already, doesn't know what he's going to find. But he goes off towards home. Ezra returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Now, what would you expect to see at this point? I mean, you don't expect what we're about to see, right? Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned. Kind of rehearses his line. You go through the rehearsed line. Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. And yet there's no, hope you've learned your lesson. Yeah, you might be a servant, but I'm going to make you pay for this. Watch, but his father said to his servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for the son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but is now found. And so the party began. Do you see what the father's doing? He's saying to his son, I want you to come and dine at the table with me. I'm not going to treat you like some slave or servant. I want you to come and dine at my table. I'm going to pull the chairs up. I want you right there with me. In fact, we're going to even kill the fattened calf. We're going to throw this big celebration party because you're home. And we get to connect. We get to commune. We get to fellowship around the table together. I mean, try to get your head around all this. I mean, the son has brought shame to the family. The son has been reckless. The son has broken his father's heart with the way he has behaved. And yet the father invites the son to not just return, but to come and dine at the table, this miniature temple, as it were, understanding of the time to come and experience warmth and acceptance and joy. Radical story. But the story doesn't stop here. The story continues and has a bit of a twist to it, a little different to the other two stories. We continue reading. The older brother, because remember there's another brother in the story, the older brother was angry and he wouldn't go in. You know, the older brother's been out in the fields. The older brother's been working hard and he's out there, he's doing his thing and he's been faithful and kind of like sweating, and he's coming home and he hears music in the distance. And he kind of wonders what that is. It's like strange. I'm not expecting anybody to be coming tonight. And so call some of the servants over and says, you know, what's going on? What's all the music? What's all the partying I'm kind of hearing? And the servant says, oh, your brother's come home. And dad is like throwing this massive, your dad's throwing this massive party for him, and we're going to dine together at the table. I mean, you can imagine it, can't you? The brother hears it and it's just like, sorry, like, my brother's come home. My brother who has trashed our family name, broken my father's heart, ruined our family reputation. He's come home and dad has the audacity to invite him to the table. Dad actually has the audacity to throw a party for him. What in the world is going on here? Older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and have never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And all that time you never gave me even one goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back with squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf? Reasonable question, isn't it? I'm sure at least the Pharisees would agree. Maybe many of us here would agree. After all, this son, in their minds, should be the hero. He remained home. He's been working hard. He was faithful through everything that was going on. It's the younger son that's been a disgrace, not worthy of anything except rejection. And now the younger son is having a party, dining, having a party held in his honor. I mean, shouldn't spaces at the table be reserved for people who have it all together, for people who have behaved well? Why in the world would you bring somebody to the table who has shamed the family, trashed the family name? Why would you bring him in? Father responds. Father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day. For your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. It's a story Jesus told in order to explain why he hangs out at the table with the notorious sinners, why his table is inclusive. Everybody listening at the time would have understood that these notorious sinners were just like the younger brother, kind of squandered what God, their father, had given to them, been partying up, living life in ways that they shouldn't. They'd get the connection. The Pharisees were no doubt smart enough to realize that they were represented by the older brother in the story. Upset at the way the younger brother is included at the table and dining with the Father. And Jesus believes that this is the way God the Father deals with people, that his table is inclusive. As such, Jesus has an inclusive table too. The Pharisees don't like the practice of Jesus having an inclusive table. You see, the Pharisees thought that only people who have it all together, only people who have it right should sit at the table. They divided the world into the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are the ones you should have at your table. The bad guys are the ones that should be excluded from the table. Surely, if God was going to invite anyone to dine with him, it should be the good ones, not the bad ones. It should be the older brother types, not the younger brother types. Only those who have done everything right should sit at the table. Dining with these people, those people, the notorious sinners, why would you ever do that? I mean, they've messed up. They've done all these things wrong. They're notorious in what they've done. And Jesus is very aware of the way they're thinking, about how they define who's in and who's out, and the way they think that everybody should just have it all together to sit and dine. And it's not that Jesus is oblivious to their sin. Jesus knows full well who these sinners, these notorious sinners are and what they've done. And when we come to understand that Jesus is none other than the Son of God, and that this sin is an affront to God, that what these notorious sinners have been doing is also hurtful to him. That somehow these people have turned their back on Jesus, the Son of God. These people have hurt and offended Jesus because of their behavior. They've ruined the family name. They've trashed the image that God made them in. And so how is it that Jesus can include such people at his table? How is it that he can warmly embrace them? You know, later on in the New Testament, we kind of read a little bit more about this. The Apostle Paul says, through Jesus, God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. This includes you who were once far away from God. You were on the chair, separated. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions. Yet now, he has reconciled you. Reconciled is just bringing you back to dine at the table. It's a family word. He's now reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. You once had faults, numerous faults that separated you as enemies. But through what Jesus has done, by dying on the cross, there is now no single fault, and you were invited to dwell at the table. These sinners were once separated from him. There was a massive wall that existed between them, but what Jesus did provided what was necessary for these notorious sinners and all other sinners, you and me included, to come and dine at Jesus' table. But forgiveness is never easy, is it? I reminded us of this a few weeks ago. You know, think about what happens when somebody wrongs you. You know, it can happen at an economic level. For instance, last Sunday, I had a car accident. After our night service, I was heading between meetings and heading down the road, and somebody came out from a side street and whacked into the side of me. And then, sped off. And so, I've got insurance, cars all covered, but, there's this thing, we call the excess. And so, at the moment, I'm like $500 out of pocket. And so, there's a couple of things that can happen. Either he pays the excess, $500, or I pay the excess of $500, or continue driving around in a car that has a big dent in the side of it. Now, for him to pay, thankfully, there were some witnesses, and they got his registration details, and I can, find out where he lives and all that type of thing. So, I could find out where he lives and make sure he pays the $500. Or I can just absorb the $500 and forgive. Now, that's how it works, isn't it? But to just forgive and to let him off that, there's still a debt that needs to be paid. I'm $500 out of pocket. Or I'm going to continue driving around with a dent in the side of the car. There's a debt I need to absorb if I was just to let him off what he did. And if that's true at an economic level for something pretty small, it's true on so many other levels too, isn't it? goes beyond financial loss. It might be the loss of opportunity. It might be that someone robs you of happiness, robs you of reputation, robs you of something, and you never get it back. And you can make them pay either mentally or physically, where you try to rob them of their reputation and you trash their name, or you make sure they kind of don't get the opportunities they would have coming to them anymore, and you try to level the playing field, or you go to their house and you smash the side of their car and make them pay for it. Or you forgive. But forgiveness is always hard because it's a pain, isn't it? It's like a form of death. You feel it. Jesus surely understands forgiveness. All the sin that was done to him, and he steps in, absorbs the pain. He covered the debt, so the debt is now cancelled, and the forgiveness is able to come. And that verse says he did it through his death on the cross, taking all the sin that you and I had done, all the crimes, all the ways we had found, misplaced identity and security, and the things we thought were right, and the ways we had chased after stuff that wasn't good. And he deals with it all, so that forgiveness is available. And the reason the religious leaders thought that the people who should have it right should sit at the table, that's how they understood it all. But Jesus absorbed all their sin and guilt and debt, so they were now made right with God. And they could sit at the table and be completely clean in Jesus' eyes. You see, this story explains why Jesus can dine with notorious sinners. But Jesus' invitation to dine is not just to the notorious sinners. I think there's a subtle invitation here in the story too, that the older brother types, the Pharisees and the religious leaders, there's an invite to them to come and dine at the table too. I mean, you pick that up in the story. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. The father wants the older brother to come to the table too. He wants the older brother to come and dine. He's invited too. It's just a choice that needs to be made. See this all the time with the New Testament, where Jesus is saying to all sorts of people, all groups of people, come dine with me. He says to a church called Laodicea, he has nothing positive to say about. But at the end of a letter the Spirit of God sent to this church, we read this. Jesus says, look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. It's an invitation where Jesus invites you and me to come dine at the table, that whatever has happened, come and let's work that out. Let's come and sit at the table, dine together in this relationship with God. A relationship with chatting and conversing and communing and deep connection taking place. How do you respond to Jesus' invitation? Well, before you answer that, I think it's important to realize that when you say yes to Jesus' invitation to dine with him, you're also saying yes to dine with others. You see, to dine with Jesus is also to dine with others. I think the older brother types get this. The reason the older brother didn't want to come to the table is because the younger brother was at the table. To sit at the table with his father is to also sit at the table with the younger brother. We don't know what he did. Would he come in? Would he dine? Or would he stay out and miss the opportunity? The story doesn't tell us what he did. He just tells us the invitation is there to dine. You see, Jesus' table is inclusive. Jesus' table envisions a new community that adopts the same table etiquette as Jesus. And Jesus effectively is saying to these religious leaders, I'm dining with these people and I want you to come and dine too. I'm giving you an invitation to come and dine with me, and as you come and dine with me, you're going to be coming and dining with this new community that I'm forming. A community that's transformative. A community that embodies all the same values that I, Jesus, embody, that's inclusive. Around Jesus' table are diverse groups of people. Around Jesus' table are people who have hurt you and hurt me. Around Jesus' table are people who there's been some deep misunderstandings with. But to dine with Jesus is also to dine with them, to dine with each other. It means we can't sit at Jesus' table and exclude the other. To sit at Jesus' table is to also include the other. I mean, this is big, isn't it? That's why Paul would say things like this: accept each other just as Christ has accepted you, so that God will be given glory. You could come dine at the table just like God is inviting you to dine, and He wants others to be invited to come dine. Accept others at the table just as God has invited and accepted you to be at the table. That's what we see in the New Testament all the time. That's why we see a derelict slave can become a herald for the kingdom. A shyster like Zacchaeus can be redeemed as a son of Abraham. A terrorist named Saul can become a chosen instrument to the Gentiles. A privileged slave owner can learn that Christian charity extends to all persons, including slaves. You see, we must forgive. There's no other way to it. But for forgiveness to happen, we must first honestly face the sin that has affected us. Then we must choose to release to God the debt that's due. The only way that happens is when we're willing to look to the cross. Without looking to the cross, there is no way to atone for the debt that has occurred. You see, Jesus went to a cross. He was spat on. He was mocked. He was everything bad happening to him, and He's placed up on the cross. And what does Jesus do as He takes all the sin of the world upon Himself? He looks down at people and says, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do." In other words, the crucified Christ, in front of Him were these spiritually sick sinners just like us and those who injure us. And until we see how great our sin is and how much grief it causes God and others, we will never know the cost Christ absorbed upon Himself to forgive us and to forgive others. To place their sin on the cross and see their sin on the cross is how we come and we dine at the table with others. I like the way C.S. Lewis, the writer of the Chronicles of Narnia, put it. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has excused the inexcusable in you. I mean, isn't that so true? Some of you might remember the story of a lady called Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch Christian who, along with her father and family, sheltered and helped many Jews in the Nazi Holocaust escape. And she was eventually captured and imprisoned. Corrie watched in horror, she writes in her book, as the Nazi jailers brutalized her sister Betsy in the processing center at Ravensbrück. Many years later, after the war had ended, one of those jailers heard her speaking one night and came along to her talk and came up to her after her talk. I mean, he's one of the guys that has imprisoned her, that has been an instrument of pain to her and particularly to her sister. And here at this church in Munich, this jailer is there, comes up to her after the service, and this is what she writes about the experience. He was the first of our jailers that I had seen since that time. And suddenly it was all there. The room full of mocking men. The heaps of clothing. Betsy's pain-blanched face. His hand was thrust out to shake mine, and I, who had preached so often the need to forgive, kept my hand at my side. Even as the angry, vengeful thoughts boiled through me, I saw the sin of them. Jesus Christ had died for this man, and I was going to ask for more? Lord Jesus, I prayed, forgive me and help me to forgive him. I tried to smile. I struggled to raise my hand. I could not. I felt nothing but the slightest spark of warmth or charity. And so again, I breathed a silent prayer. Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give me your forgiveness. And as I took his hand, the most incredible thing happened. From my shoulder along my arm and through my hand, a current seemed to pass from me to him, while into my heart sprang a love for this stranger that almost overwhelmed me. And so I discovered that it is not on our forgiveness any more than on our goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on his. Now, my guess is that in a room this size, there has been lots of things done to you and done to me. Lots of reasons why we would want to exclude somebody from our table where we dine. And if I asked you to write down a whole range of things where people have hurt you or offended you or done whatever to you, it would be a long list. And if we put all of them together, it would be a big heap. But you see, to dine with Jesus is also to dine with that person and those people who have hurt us. Your journey of forgiving may not lead you to the same experience that Corrie ten Boom had, where suddenly in the midst of her pain as she's praying, she feels something changing. But it begins right there. Will you forgive? Because Jesus has done all that is necessary for forgiveness to take place. He's absorbed the hurt. He's absorbed the offense. He's absorbed the words that were spoken. He's absorbed the actions that were done. He's taken it all. So reconciliation can now take place. That's the theological term used by scholars to explain that there was once enmity between two people. Now the reason for that enmity has been dealt with. The debt is gone. And two people who were at enmity, were enemies with each other, can now be friends. That happens vertically in our relationship with God, where we were not friends with God. There was not friendship between us, but now there can be. We can dine at his table. It doesn't just happen vertically, it happens horizontally, where two people who aren't friends with each other can now come and connect and reconnect. On your seats when you came in today is a postcard. Wonder if you can take your Instagram picture today. Just hold it in your hand for a moment. I want you to think of this as an invitation. First of all, it's an invitation from Jesus to you. You might want to think of Jesus as the host. He's inviting you to sit at his table. His table is inclusive. His table envisions a whole new community. His table heals. His table transforms. And he's inviting you to join him at his table. How will you respond? You know, maybe you can identify with some of the characters in the story of the prodigal son. Maybe you can identify with the younger brother that went out and just partied up and lived life. And you know there's a lot of elements in your life that are similar to that. And Jesus is saying to you today, I want you to come. I want you to return. I want you to sit at my table with me. I don't want you to have your chair at the side anymore. Or maybe you can relate more to the Pharisees, the religious types who thought that they had performed well, and because they had everything right, at least in their minds, because of that, they could come and dine. But it had nothing to do with their performance. You can't dine with Jesus because you performed well. You dine with Jesus because he's done everything necessary to get you to come and to dine. It's a response to his invitation. And again, he says to us, I stand at the door and knock. If you would just open the door, I'll come in, I'll dine with you. And we can enjoy intimacy, we can enjoy relationships, we can chat, we can commune, we can experience deep connection together. How will you respond? You know, in a moment, I'm going to lead us in a prayer. And maybe for you, you just want to say yes to that prayer as a way of saying, yes, Jesus, I'm responding to your invitation. And whether you've grown up in church life, whether you've been a Christian for a long time, or whether you haven't come to know Jesus yet, wherever you are, it's this chance to respond to Jesus' invitation again, to come and dine with him and enjoy relationship at his table. I wonder, though, if this postcard is also another type of invitation. Not just an invitation from Jesus to you, but an invitation really from you to the other. You know, the reason why the chair is at the back. You know, maybe, again, to remind you that to dine with Jesus is to dine with others. And maybe this is you in the picture. And you're waiting for that other person to come. Or maybe this is the other person and you're inviting them to sit with you. And that despite whatever happened weeks, months, years ago, knowing all the hurt, maybe the misunderstanding, that you would take the initiative to invite them to come and reconcile and dine and converse and chat and connect, because Jesus has done everything necessary for this to happen. Jesus invites you to reconcile, invites you to take the chair. And whatever was done back here, whatever caused the rift, Jesus has done everything necessary to restore you into relationship. And he wants you to be able to pull the chair up, to come and dine with Jesus, and to come and dine with the other. To join with me as we pray. You might just want to say yes or no to these statements to make this your prayer. Jesus, I've been out in the fields, working hard, performing, but I've never actually come in to dine with you. Yes or no? Jesus, I've been living from one experience to the other, running away from you, but I've never dined with you. Yes or no? Jesus, today I respond to your invitation to dine with you, to be in relationship with you. Yes or no? Jesus, thank you that you have provided every single thing necessary for forgiveness to take place. Yes or no? Jesus, just as you have included me at your table, would you help me to include others at the table? Yes or no? Jesus, I find it really hard to forgive. Yes or no? Jesus, please help me to see that other person as a person you have and you can forgive. Yes or no? Jesus, thank you for all that you do to bring us to this table to dine with you. Because of you we pray. Amen.